Hey there, welcome to Pickled Parables. This podcast is presented by Parable Ministries as a Bible teaching resource. Thank you for joining us. Pickled Parables is a podcast about taking in and living out the Bible. Here we will study, contemplate, and testify to the Bible's incredible teachings and how it leads us to live better lives. To stay up to date with all things Parable, follow us on Instagram at parable_ministries and visit our website at parableministries.com. We hope today's message finds you well.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Pickled Parables. I'm going to be sharing with you this week. Now, my name is Hunter Hoover. I do a lot of the podcast scheduling, and I've been honored to be able to share with you in our study of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. I want to note at the beginning of the episode here, last time in our 1st, 2nd, 3rd John series, you heard from Jesse. And in that episode, Jesse told you that I would be sharing a recap of 1st and 2nd and 3rd John this time. I'm going to be sharing a recap, but not yet. Before I do so, I want to take you, the listener, along with me down what is in some ways a bit of a speculative rabbit trail to maybe add another layer of appreciation for the letters that John wrote. Since Jesse recorded, I've been on a bit of a spiral reading and studying and cross-referencing a handful of things. And this little tangent was spurred on by work that I have been doing on another one of our shows, Commentaries. Go check it out. In it, we have been studying the book of 1 Corinthians, paragraph by paragraph. I know. Here we are. Coupled that with a podcast episode I was listening to this last week, wherein this topic came up around the development of the New Testament, there was a character that stuck out to me. In Jesse's episode on 3rd John, he noted that the letter is addressed to a man named Gaius, or as some pronunciation guides have told me, Gaius. Gaius is commended for his hospitality by John's letter. And Jesse made an inference as to who this Gaius might be. And I want to note, that inference kind of started the ball rolling on my rabbit hole. He noted that this Gaius has likely been influenced by John's testimony and his work, either his gospel writing or some of his pastoral ministries. And I think that is accurate. John played a role in Gaius's salvation, for sure. But we don't have as much data on the salvation of Gaius. When he came to know Christ, I have a guess, and I'm going to posit that guess as we dive into this. But that got me thinking, who is this Gaius guy? And why does his name sound so familiar to me? Today, I want to take us on a brief rabbit trail to look at the biblical data on the person of Gaius, as well as what church history suggests about the man, and what we can gain in our appreciation not only for the letters John wrote, but for the rest of our scriptures because of this man's influence. First, I'll note, the name stood out to me as Jesse was highlighting it, because he is mentioned in Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians 1:14, Paul says that a man named Gaius was one of the very few people he baptized when he was with them. And it's a guess whether this is a reference to Paul's time with them, which you can go read in Acts chapter 18, or if this was on another trip. I'm not sure. But I think Gaius was in Corinth when Paul was in Corinth, and this is around the time Paul would have shared the gospel with Gaius. It is for this reason that Paul says he was one of the very few handful of people he baptized while he was there. And so that got me thinking, is this the same Gaius? And if so, what's the connection here? And is Gaius this somewhat of a linchpin between the Apostle John and the Apostle Paul? Our introduction to Gaius is really in the book of Acts, where Gaius is listed as a fellow believer who is jailed in the city of Ephesus along with another believer for the riots incited by a silversmith in Ephesus who incited those riots because the preaching of the gospel was cutting in on his sales and the work that he was doing to build things essentially to the temple of Artemis there. Gaius is listed as one who is thrown in prison at this time. Gaius here is called a Macedonian who traveled with Paul. It says, the city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. Now, while at this point in time, Paul is not dragged into this theater area with them, Gaius is called a Macedonian who's a travel companion of Paul. Later, just barely not even a chapter later, after this riot is quelled, we are told about another sighting of Gaius. Here, at the beginning of Acts chapter 20, we are told that when Paul sent for the disciples, he encouraged them and said farewell and decided to depart for Macedonia. Remember, Gaius is called a Macedonian. When he'd gone through those regions and had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece. There he spent 3 months, and when a plot was made against him by the Jews, he was about to set sail for Syria. He decided to return through Macedonia, again, where this Gaius is listed as being from. Sopater, the Berean, son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus, and Secundus, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy, and the Asians, Tychicus and Trophimus. These went on ahead and were waiting for us at Troas. Now, I want to note something here. Here, another mention of Gaius lists him as Gaius of Derbe. Now, does this necessitate that Gaius of Derbe was different than Gaius of Macedonia? I'm not convinced. The reason I'm not convinced is the other Macedonian listed in Acts 19, Aristarchus, who was dragged into the theater along with Gaius as a part of this riot, is here in Acts 20 called a Thessalonian. So it is as if in one instance, Paul is highlighting where they hail from, and in the other instance, Luke, not Paul. And in the other instance is highlighting what their nationality and heritage is. In Acts 20, it seems to be calling more on who they are as people and not where they came from as individuals. For my money, this Gaius of Derbe is the Gaius Paul met in Macedonia and is the Gaius that accompanied Paul while he was in Corinth. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of moving parts. But what you should note is Paul and Gaius were in Ephesus at the same time, likely doing ministry together as they traveled through the region. I also want to note, there is some scholarly debate on if this is a tale of two Gaiuses or not. Could be. The data on it being two separate Gaiuses is essentially the of Macedonia and of Derbe discrepancy I noted. There is, however, much more significant data that this is likely the same man. If not, it begins to be confusing when this Gaius swap happened for Paul. For my money, and I'll share in as we approach the end here in a moment, I like to believe it's the same man. What we can say for sure, though, is a man named Gaius was a travel companion and ministry partner of the Apostle Paul, who was at Ephesus, either traveling there with Silas and Timothy, or was there already accompanying Paul, and there was a character named Gaius who left from there with the Apostle Paul, and there is this connection between Paul and his ministry in Ephesus, Paul, his ministry in Corinth, and Gaius' time in Ephesus. I believe this Gaius is one and the same. I believe this is the Gaius that Paul baptized when he wrote to the letter to the Corinthians. When Paul was later in Corinth and writing his letter to the Romans, it is suggested by the end of Romans that Gaius is there in Corinth and that he showed great hospitality to Paul and housed him while he was there and helped fund his ministry. A Gaius in Corinth who is a travel companion and patron of Paul, a ministry partner of Paul, who is noted for his hospitality. This then is the question: how does Gaius cross paths with the Apostle John? And if this is the same Gaius that John addresses in 3 John, how would they have come into contact? Church history and the story of Acts suggest that this is the same Gaius, and to understand how Gaius comes to be addressed by John, we have to look at John's first letter. In 1 John, which we started at the turn of the new year, John addresses his letter, and it is understood that it was likely writing to other churches throughout Asia Minor. 1 John was written much later, likely after the destruction of the temple, likely much after Paul's time in Corinth, Paul's letter to the Romans, etc. It is presumed, because John was an elder in and a pastor to the area, that John is writing from the location of Ephesus to the churches in Asia Minor. Ephesus. Remember the place where Gaius was dragged into the theater? Well, it seems maybe Gaius's work was not done in that area, because John, in his 3rd letter, addresses Gaius and praises him for his hospitality. In many ways, Gaius, the ministry partner of Paul, seems also to be the ministry partner of John in his work now to the region of Asia Minor. I want to also note, there is an argument and there is some belief that John's gospel was written even after or around the time of the writing of his letters. and that Gaius played a significant role in bearing witness to the testimony of what he had seen from his travels with Paul, likely Luke and others, and John's other first-hand accounts. Gaius may have even been one that John consulted with in writing down and organizing his gospel. Ephesus was a part of the area John pastored and oversaw, and Gaius now seems to have returned to that area. Gaius's hospitality that he shared with Paul, he is now praised for in John's letters. John is connecting these two faith communities by calling out Gaius. It is the connection between the Gospel of John, Acts, and as a result, the Gospel of Luke, the book of Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Ephesians, and now 1st and 2nd and 3rd John. Through light mental gymnastics and a trip down the rabbit hole as I promised, these New Testament documents are connected by a handful of men and a handful of missionary journeys. I like to think, and I choose to believe, that the Gaius John wrote to was the Gaius jailed in Ephesus decades earlier. I like to think, because I like to imagine Gaius is not the only person of Ephesus that appears in John's letters. When Gaius was apprehended in Ephesus, the riot was at the hands of an Ephesian named Demetrius. A Demetrius who is listed as being contrary to the way. He worshipped at the temple of Artemis. He was a silversmith in that temple service. I want to read this to you. About that time, there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. A man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen of similar trades and said, Men, you know that from business we have our wealth. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. Demetrius was a silversmith and worshiper of Artemis. Now, I will note the data and the argument that this Demetrius of Ephesus is the same Demetrius John mentions in his third letter is much less standing and significant. However, in Bible study methods, there is a tool used called a concordance, wherein you punch in like keywords and phrases and see where they pop up together. If you punch in Gaius, Ephesus, you're going to get 2 passages. The story of the riot at Ephesus in Acts 18, 19, and 20, and 3 John. And in both of those sections, another name is populated, the man Demetrius. Could it be the same Demetrius? I'm not sure. But the fact that John calls him out specifically, and he is named specifically as this pagan-believing silversmith in Acts 19, gives me pause. There is little data to suggest it's the same man. But the flip side of that coin is there's little data to suggest that it's not. And I like that story. I like the story of a crooked silversmith who once persecuted the way, who persecuted the gospel that Paul a former persecutor himself, had brought to the region of Asia, specifically to the city of Ephesus. I like that he persecuted Gaius. And that Gaius, once a traveling companion of Paul, now turned religious leader in the area of Asia Minor, particularly in the area of Ephesus, where once he was apprehended, just may, decades later, have somehow planted a seed that was watered in the man Demetrius that turned into his mention in 3 John, which says, Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I like the story where Demetrius, through the man Gaius and his influence in the area, through the Apostle Paul's working, through the pastoral working and testimony of John, is saved. I like that because it gives me hope for people like Diotrephes, who is called out for false doctrine in 3 John. Demetrius, if he is the same as the man who once apprehended Gaius and Aristarchus for being followers of Jesus, is now a follower of Jesus. I like that story, and I choose to believe it. I'm willing to be wrong. If you have some sort of evidence that I've missed, I'm in no way perfect, and I very well could have missed some. Please shout at me, hunter@parableministries.com, and I would love to go on here and add to my understanding of that biblical record. But why did I break in on what was otherwise a mostly finished study? Because while sometimes our eyes can kind of gloss over a bit when we get to these various name drops in these letters, the men and women of these sections of letters make these letters have life. For me, these connections, even if half of them can be made, lend some boots on the ground to the ministry of these people. They make the people who receive the letters feel real because they were real. They were written by real people to real people, delivered by real people in actual church history. As promised, next week I'll summarize 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, these letters. And in that, I will share with you, we're going to go beyond the letters a little bit. And so in preparation for that, I want to note, what of the man Gaius? Church history records that John appointed Gaius as a bishop or leader of the church at Pergamum, another church in Asia Minor. Therein we can say John, technically, wrote 2 letters to Gaius. 3rd John and the letter to the church of Pergamum. In Revelation chapter 2, we read, To the angel of the church of Pergamum, write the words of him who has the sharp 2-edged sword. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. Yet you hold fast my name, and you did not deny my faith even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. So you also have some who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Therefore, repent. If not, I will come to you soon, and war against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one except the one who receives it knows. Turns out, Gaius had a tough go in Pergamum. Pergamum is described as a wicked area, a place where Satan dwells. It was a pagan city. It was one in which being a follower of the way would be difficult. Gaius had experience in being persecuted for being a follower of the way. John says they're commended because they have stood even though they are in the middle of wickedness. They've remained true in the face of this, but in the face of this, they seem to have begun to compromise Christian morality and played around with paganism, not to adopt it, but to adapt it to their faith, to syncretize their belief with the practices of the culture. To do so would likely be for survival in the face of death and persecution. The word and instruction to them is clear. Do not compromise. And he encourages them. God sends spiritual sustenance and will provide spiritually to those who stand, and a reminder that they have a new identity. They have a name written that only they know. Yes, to stand for the way, to stand for Jesus in the middle of where Satan's throne is, might result in death. But the letter to Pergamum says it's okay. To the one who conquers, I will give some of this hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone. Gaius had a tough go of it in Pergamum. And I look at Gaius as this example of faithfulness, hospitality, encouragement, and a refusal to compromise in the face of persecution. His church needed a reminder of that. But I also don't think they would have been given that reminder if it wouldn't have been beneficial. Gaius is a pretty background character. He's name-dropped a handful of times. But for me, and my trip down this rabbit hole, and listener, I hope you've enjoyed it. He's helped bring the connections of our New Testament to life a little bit. He helps bridge some of the theological gaps between the Apostle John and the Apostle Paul. He helps tie a very important part of this gospel mission together, and he gives me hope and a challenge to remain steadfast under trial in the face of wickedness and in the face of a temptation to compromise. It's something really, as Christians, we can all face. We're going to summarize 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John next time. I hope that this trip down the rabbit hole for the man Gaius and a tertiary role, the person of Demetrius, was beneficial to you. Thank you guys for joining for our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John series. I will catch you next week as we close it out. Love y'all, and we will see you soon. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to Pickled Parables. If you enjoyed this message, please rate us, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you're interested in more things like this, check out our secondary podcast called My Dusty Bible. To stay up to date with all things Parable, follow us on Instagram at parable_ministries and visit our website at parableministries.com. Parable is a volunteer organization, and we would deeply appreciate your prayers. Thank you for joining us today. We'll catch you later.